and I want to welcome everybody for joining. My name's Wyatt Shields. I'm the city manager. And what we'd like to do today is share information with you who've signed on for this meeting, and also get your comments and your questions. And I'll note that this meeting is being taped, and it will be available on the city's website. And we're also working to be able to have all this material translated into different languages that we know are spoken in our community, so that this information can be accessed by everybody in our community. The federal government, the United States Congress, and signed by the President, approved funding through the America Rescue Plan for local governments and state governments. And so our topic today is to discuss the city's allocation of those federal dollars to help us recover from the COVID pandemic and make needed investments in the community. And we want to, before we make decisions on these things, we want to get as much public input and get your thoughts on our priorities. Our goal is to take a package to the City Council for consideration at a work session coming up very shortly on November 15th. The Council has been discussing this really since the allocation was made over the last summer. And we'll take a set of recommendations to the City Council for discussion at work session on the November 15th. And if the Council deems it to be ready for public hearing, then they would have a first reading on a budget amendment on November 22nd, and then a final consideration of a budget amendment on December 13th. And that would really be just for this year's allocation. The remaining 4 years of the program would still be subject to appropriation in future years. So that's what we're trying to do today, is to get information out to the public and get your input in as these decisions ultimately will be made by the City Council. Before we get started, I do want to just recognize a few people that are on this call. And I noted Councilmember Phil Duncan is on the call. I think there will be a few other council members that are signing in as well. And again, this meeting is taped, and so it will be accessible to council members after the fact as well. And we'll make a written summary of the comments and questions that we're getting today. Councilmember Duncan, I don't know if you'd like to make if you'd like to make any other welcoming comments as a member of council before we get things kicked off. And Phil, you were muted, I think, at the moment.
All right, can you hear me now? Is that any better?
We can indeed.
Great. Okay, thank you, Wyatt. Thanks for everybody joining us. I know there's lots of interest in this topic. I was on another city meeting last night, and this came up, and several people said they were going to tune in, so I'm encouraged to hear the interest. We're looking forward to hearing your presentation again and hearing from what the community thinks. So good luck.
Thank you, sir. A few other people I'd like to recognize. For today's presentation, Kieran Bawa, our Chief Financial Officer, will walk us through some of the kind of a structure of some numbers that we've been discussing with the City Council so far, and we'd like to get your feedback on those. We also have Cindy Mester, who's the Deputy City Manager. She's been working statewide to both lobby the U.S. Treasury on clarification of these rules, but also to make sure that local governments across the state, as well as here in Falls Church, understand the rules and that we're being consistent in how we use these dollars. So Cindy, thank you for your leadership locally and also across the Commonwealth of Virginia. Kristen Michael, with our Chief Operating Officer with the school system, is on this call as well, and we've been working closely with the school system. They have access to ARPA funds directly, but also in our proposal, we do have dollars going to the schools to meet critical needs there as well. Steve Mason is our HR director, and part of the use of funds is to provide some premium pay for essential municipal workers, city workers who have been working very hard throughout the pandemic, even during the early lockdown periods of coming into work to provide critical services, and premium pay is an eligible use as well. And lastly, I'll thank Susan Finarelli again for her work on this, and she will also finish out our presentation today just to talk about the other venues that people can use to get involved, including a business survey that is out, as well as a community input form that we're using just to gather information, and she'll tell us a little bit more about that. Next slide, please. I'm going to just talk about 2 or 3 slides, then I'll turn it over to Kiran Bawa for a little bit more detail. So in terms of dollar amounts that we're talking about, it is significant. So what Congress has allocated to the City of Falls Church is just over $18 million. We have 4 years to encumber these dollars, so by December 2024, and to expend them by December 2026. So we're thinking of this as a 4-year plan. And when I mentioned the plan that we would take to City Council on November 15th, we intend to present a 4-year plan, but just the council's initial action would be to appropriate funds for the current fiscal year, which ends on June 30th. And so that would be the action that they'd be taking, as well as adopting sort of the overall 4-year structure for the use of these funds. The council did take action over the summer to consider immediate needs, and they allocated $1 million for immediate needs. And so what we're really talking about is the remaining $17 million to be allocated. Next slide. So the council also did lay out some guiding principles over the summer, and some of those are as intended by Arpa to provide relief to the community as we recover from the pandemic, to invest in long-held city priorities. So let's look at our adopted capital improvements program and other policies to see if we can use these dollars to advance or accelerate those. The council laid out, we want to use these dollars for lasting and transformative impact, not just, kind of all immediate needs, but things that will provide a long-term positive impact for the community. Incorporate input from across the community, spread them out over the investments over the 4-year window. And this is an important point for fiscal management to avoid commitments that have ongoing operating costs. So, things like salary or hiring additional staff, all of those have impacts once these dollars are gone. So we'll be very careful in the use of these dollars to try to get them in the realm of one-time investments that would have a lasting positive impact. So some of the things we're talking about, stormwater investments that you'll see when Kiran presents in just a moment, that's a significant area where we would be proposing to use these ARPA dollars. That's an eligible use. The lost revenue, so we can use ARPA dollars to make up for lost revenues that the city experienced over the pandemic. And using lost revenue, that criteria opens up the ability, if we so choose, to make investments in our parks, in our sidewalks, missing links, traffic calming, and other priorities, long-held priorities of the city. You'll see that there's proposals for investments in affordable housing, also a long-held and growing need in the city. There is funding for business assistance and direct assistance for households as we continue to recover from the economic fallout from the pandemic. You'll see investments in schools, including investments in mental health and behavioral counseling for our schools. So many of our youth have gone through a very difficult time with being away from school from a period of time, and I think schools across the country are grappling with that and need additional resources to assist our students. and that is true here as well. And I also just want to note one of the eligible uses, I mentioned it earlier, is premium pay in the form of one-time bonuses is an eligible use for our essential employees who came to work throughout the pandemic, and that would be one of the uses that we'll want to get feedback on and ultimately bring to council on the 15th. So those are some of the things we'll hear a little bit more about. So let me turn it over to Karen Bawa, and she'll walk us through some of the details, and then we'll hear from Cindy just a little bit about the statewide context, because there's also about $4 billion that's been allocated to the Commonwealth of Virginia, and they will be making those budget decisions. They already have made some, but we'll be making additional ones. Cindy will tell us about that. And then Susan again will talk about the next steps in public outreach. Ms. Bawa, thank you.
Good afternoon. So in accordance with these guiding principles that Mr. Shields just laid out, a preliminary set of investment strategies have been identified by city staff and in discussion with council on October 22nd work session. So this preliminary plan focuses on investments for our future, including infrastructure, roughly 40%, and another 40% for public health and services to disproportionately impacted communities. And the remaining 20% is to address negative economic impacts, revenue replacement, and premium pay for eligible employees, and some administrative functions in order to meet the federal procurement regulations and stuff like that. So looking at it a little bit closer, the next few slides are going to provide information on the preliminary plan that focuses both on short-term and long-term investments, which are grouped based on the Arpa expenditure categories that was provided as part of the reporting structure, as part of the guidance that was laid out by the U.S. Treasury. So there is $2.3 million to fund public health initiatives such as testing, vaccinations, contact tracing, personnel protective equipment, health transportation, and dental assistance for low-income seniors and people with disabilities, as well as park improvements, as park use and a desire for more outdoor programming has increased due to the pandemic. So I'll just shift to a little bit on what these park improvements are. So these park improvements include installing a permanent stage on the back of the barn in Cherry Hill Park to both reduce maintenance needs and increase availability and use for outdoor events, and also includes the development of usable park space at the Fellows property, replace end-of-life sport court lighting of tennis and basketball courts at Cherry Hill Park and Cavalier Trail Park, replace some very old play equipment at Berman Park, Cavalier Trail Park, and Crossman Parks, and create an outdoor covered space for fitness classes, such as for art classes and things which are currently held in grass areas and now tend to get canceled due to bad weather or extreme weather. So along with providing additional operational grant support for city arts and culture groups. So these are the proposed uses in that preliminary category that we just looked at. I will go back. So continuing on to the $1.8 million for negative economic impacts, such as direct assistance to households. As Mr. Shields mentioned earlier, it's like a guaranteed payment to households with some sort of a benchmark on the AMI, and emergency assistance for food, rent, and utilities, internet access for vulnerable population for accessing shop clinic informations, continuation of SNAP at the farmers market, and also assistance for small businesses, including grants to eligible businesses, COVID recovery marketing plan. So that is a big portion of this negative impacts, economic impacts category. The next is $3 million a proposal of $3 million for services to disproportionately impacted communities, such as mental health professionals for the schools, childcare assistance, and for creating an acquisition strike fund for preserving and creating affordable housing in the city. So continuing along, the plan includes next $500,000 to cover for premium pay for essential workers for city government and the schools who regularly perform in-person work through the COVID period and interact with others at work or physically handle items handled by the others, as well as employees that work in critical infrastructure sectors and are considered critical to protect the health and well-being of the residents. So this is one of the allowable categories under the expenditure plan. And then there is an investment proposal of about $7.5 to $8 million for stormwater mitigation by funding projects included in the city's adopted CIP. And I'll shift to that. Take a closer look at what those are. So the adopted CIP includes Trips Run watershed improvements, which consists of 2 stormwater projects in the same watershed that will reduce flooding and improve water quality through the use of stormwater best management practices supported by the state SEQ resources. And the first component is the Hillwood Avenue, which is centered around the 700 block of Hillwood Avenue in the Trips Run watershed. And the second component is the Sharrow Avenue component, which is located in the area of Sharrow Avenue and Westmoreland, and South Virginia Avenue and Trips Run watershed. And as well as reduction of runoff flowing into the 4-mile run at a key location in the watershed by using green infrastructure practices in this area along Lincoln Avenue, which will slow the flow and aid in reducing the chances of flooding downstream. So those are the proposed projects to be funded using the ARPA funds. And one thing to note is that per the ARPA guidance, project eligibility includes water quality improvements and not water quantity. So bearing that in mind, these projects have been picked. So moving along with the earlier investment strategies, the revenue replacement proposal includes $1.4 million for multimodal improvements, including bus shelter replacements, traffic calming, sidewalks, and pedestrian pathway improvements throughout the city, and a $340,000 towards assistance for federal procurement and compliance, and also grant compliance and reporting for this 18 million grant. And the next steps include community outreach, which we are in the process of, and getting input from residents and businesses all the way through mid-November, and take a proposal to council, a refined version of this preliminary plan that has been put out for residents and businesses, take it to council on November 15th with a request for amendment, for a budget amendment for a first reading of an ordinance for funding projects roughly to the tune of $3 to $4 million to fund projects that can be started in the current fiscal year and can be get us through the next 6 to 8 months. So request that amount of funding for now as first reading on November 22nd and second reading on December 13th, and hopefully adoption that day before the end of the calendar year so that these projects can be moved along. With that, I will hand over to our Deputy City Manager, Cindy Mester, to give us a view on how similar other funding is being handled at the state level.
Great, thank you, Ms. Bawa. Good to join you all this afternoon and appreciate the community interest. As Mr. Shields indicated, there is also state funding that's coming through ARPA. ARPA is actually a very large federal program with about 18 different funding sources. And within that, the City of Falls Church has received the local funding that we're speaking of, and the state is also receiving state funding similar to this. For their part, that's similar to what we're talking about today with this fiscal recovery fund. They received $4.3 billion. In the special session in August, they allocated about 3.2 of that. The remainder will be part of the next governor's budget, which will come out this upcoming December. That would be effective next year. So they're also doing tranches similar to us. A lot of the funding that they are looking at will assist K-12, broadband, and public health to make sure we can do vaccination and testing and PPEs and sort of that immediate response to health. The broadband is the largest part of their commitment to make sure there's full internet access throughout the Commonwealth, as we learn from the virtual schools and virtual work, how important that was. In total, however, because of all those funding sources that I mentioned, the 18 programs, there's actually $13.8 billion of federal resources coming to the Commonwealth as a whole. The state funding, state recovery funds, and the local funding recovery funds that I just mentioned. But also separate from that, there's additional K-12 funding, higher education, childcare, emergency rental assistance, homeownership, the vaccine, so and businesses and tourism. So there's quite a bit of resources out there. So as we work through our local plan, we are working hard to make sure we're accessing the other sources to not duplicate, but complement and leverage. So it's just wanted to have an opportunity to provide a bit of the bigger context. And now we'll continue the discussion on the local investment strategies. Thank you, Mr. Shields and Ms. Bawa.
Susan Pinarelli is next. She's our Director of Communications.
Thank you, Karen. If you can, I think we need to go to the next slide. There we go. All right. So everything about ARPA is on our website. It's fallschurchva.gov/ARPA. And that's where you can find all basic information. What is ARPA? What are the categories? Those initial needs are on there. I saw someone in the chat asked about that. So hopefully you've had a chance to check it out. I will ask for details in the Q&A portion, of course. And we also have links to our community input form and our business and nonprofit survey. They are both on that website, as well as videos from town hall council meetings and all the meeting materials. Our outreach plan is in full swing. We are trying to get the word out about all the funding proposals, and of course trying to get input from everyone through those input forms and surveys that I just mentioned. We might have some more focus groups coming up, meeting with particular community groups, and just trying to get more input from everyone. And Karen, if you could advance to that last slide, perfect. Thank you very much. On our website, we also, and this is a little bit old information, but that's okay. We'll have the latest and greatest. Through that website, you can subscribe to our newsflash. That is the at the top of the web page, and whenever I make updates to the web page, you'll get an email saying, hey, here's the latest and greatest information. I think I have gone over everything now, and I'll put in the chat the website if anyone wants to click on through to it quickly. And again, our community input form is available in English, Spanish, and Vietnamese, as well as the business and nonprofit survey, also available in all 3 languages. So that's it from me. Wyatt, I think we're ready to open it for Q&A, I believe.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Susan, Cindy, and Kieran. And I know we have one question that was in the chat, and I'll go ahead and just read it out. And then I'm going to turn it over to Cindy. Cindy's been sort of our compliance officer on the use of ARPA dollars. And it may not actually be a compliance question, but just maybe just a policy question, how we justify it. But the question is, how do we justify using negative revenue impacts for funding park improvements if the park improvements were not in the budget prior to COVID?
Thank you for that question, and look forward to other questions that we can respond to. The way the Treasury Guidance came out, they took the 4 legislative categories that I see in the chat nicely outlined too, of public health, negative impact, services to disproportionately impacted communities, and then premium pay and infrastructure. And they broke the 4 broad ones into 7, and then they did multiple subcategories under that. So that's how we also can get to over 18 categories. And I do believe Susan has helped me put that summary list on the webpage to see how it gets from 4 broad ones in the legislative foundation to the actual guidance and implementation. And within that, the parks programs that we are looking at are tied to public health, and is tied to the importance of physical and mental health during the COVID situation, as well as preventing spread of disease and needing to be outside. So a lot of times those outside facilities have gotten run down, and so you can do maintenance, and this has come through the U.S. Treasury as an eligible use, or you can expand those resources in order to provide that safe environment physically from the COVID spread, but also for our physical well-being as we go through this unprecedented pandemic. Mr. Shields, or you, Susan, back to you.
Thank you very much. Hopefully that answers, I believe that was Mr. Thompson who asked that question. If it's not, feel free to add more comments in the chat, or you can raise your hand. And we do have someone raising their hand, Jean Gresco. Would you like to unmute, put on your video, however you're comfortable, and ask your question?
Yeah, yes, thanks. And thanks, Mr. Shields, for that, and the rest of your staff for a great presentation. One thing that I think would be helpful when this all goes, final recommendations to the city council, is to understand which of these things could actually lower the city property tax. I think the biggest one, and you could correct me if I'm wrong, is, you know, those items in the stormwater, which has continually been in year after year budgets. So if that can take care of by these funds, then I would assume that what we pay in bond payments could be taken out of our tax requirements. So I think that's an important thing, you know, to show which of those things might actually reduce our taxes. I too looked at the lighting of tennis courts and go, really? I mean, not only, you know, yeah, I hear the understanding of how it could fit, but that would just be ongoing maintenance and electrical costs. And it's just the fact of, with the new administration coming in Richmond, I just think bad press of Falls Church funding lighted tennis courts. I think we want to keep on good stead with that. And you have a hard enough time, Ms. Mester, getting grants from the state. And I don't think we want to do anything that may impact that, but I understand how it could be in there. I see and understand the item in terms of bonuses for the hardworking folks on the staff and the school district. I think that's great when it's related to retention and hiring aspects, but I don't think it's, when I hear about salary and the need for bonuses, if there's an overall need for increasing salaries across the board, I think that's where salary surveys come in from our HR to really look at, are we competitive? Are we getting the best and the brightest, et cetera? So I'm not opposed to bonuses, but again, I look at the broader picture of salaries to retain and keep and hire good people for both the schools and the city. Definitely yes. For those still impacted with food needs or SNAP, I think that's fantastic. I think it's very important because there are still people that are, you know, out of work or, you know, lower hours, and that can just follow in with the business community. If there's some way to combine the business community that desperately needs people, to find those people that need those jobs. Anything that can combine that would be win-win all across the board. Maybe the last thing, just be it as it may, I did the survey and looked at it, but I just was concerned that it wasn't a one-to-one of your recommendations to the survey items, which to me was like, there's some continuity, but I thought there'd be like a combined look at your proposal and judge it accordingly. And again, you can select 5, but you didn't no way to prioritize those to say, well, this is the number 1 and this is. So I thought that would have been more beneficial, but be that as it may, I appreciate this opportunity to give my 2 cents. And again, thanks, Mr. Shields and the rest of the staff for the presentation.
Well, Mr. Gresko, thank you for your comments. That was exactly what we're looking for in terms of these town hall meetings, to get that type of detailed and thoughtful input. A couple things just to respond to, and I can't respond to all of your comments, but immediately, but a few that I will try to get back with you on just for the benefit of everyone. In terms of impact on taxpayer costs, you did identify stormwater, and I think that is a really important one to identify. After the July storms of 2018, and then flooding again in 2019, and then again in 2020, the Stormwater Task Force recommended 6 major stormwater projects, and those are in the capital improvements program. We're advancing engineering on all of those right now. And if we pave them entirely locally, it would result in a doubling of the stormwater fee that people pay right now. And so by using ARPA dollars for stormwater, that is an eligible use. And so that will significantly mitigate those future adjustments to fees that we had originally contemplated would be necessary. So I think that is one important benefit. And related to COVID, the reason we delayed the financing of those stormwater projects is because of that impact on our residents, but also our business community. The costs for stormwater are disproportionately borne by the commercial sector in the city. And in an era when they were experiencing massive vacancies or non-payment of rent, etc., it was essentially untenable to have a doubling of the fees that they were paying at that time. So hopefully that will be allow us to accomplish these projects with a much lower impact on our ratepayers. And I think the other the things we're using revenue loss for, like the park improvements or neighborhood traffic calming, or lighting for the tennis courts, which you do sort of point out as one, we do view those as investments that are likely going to need to be made one way or the other. And if they're made with local dollars, then that ultimately does have an impact on the overall city budget. And so we are trying to advance those, or proposing to advance those projects using these federal dollars instead. And then lastly, in terms of compensation, you're absolutely right. A competitiveness study and market studies on compensation do guide that guide compensation policy for the city. And we've been it's been a number of years since we last did one, and so that is on our work plan. In the meantime, we do have some pressing needs due to inflation, workload, and the fact that we did freeze employee pay, that addressing employee compensation is a priority for me, and I'm trying to take that message forward to the City Council for its consideration as they consider these budget amendments as well. So look forward to continuing the discussion with you, and I'll review the tape, and we can also continue this discussion because I think you had a lot of important points in your comments. One thing I will note, Susan, I think Julie Kratchman had a question earlier on as well. And that question was, what were the immediate needs that the City Council funded over the summer? And I'll summarize just a few of those. So number one was we've been using federal dollars under the CARES program, which was the first tranche of federal relief for direct assistance to households for emergency rent relief, food relief, and utility bill relief. So we wanted to continue that with the ARPA dollars. So that was one of the immediate allocations that the City Council made. For schools, they were anticipating over the summer this need for counseling and higher level of service for at-risk youth. And so they put in that request, and the council funded that as an immediate need over the summer. And on the stormwater front, we knew that if we were going to advance these projects and accelerate them, we needed to put out a recruitment for an additional stormwater project manager. So the council funded that as an immediate need, so we could get going on that. Those are some examples of the immediate needs that the council funded over the summer. And Kieran, if I left any important ones out, please chime in to add to that.
Okay, looks like maybe let's go to Sandy Tarpinian next. Sandy, if you'd like to unmute and or show your video, however you're comfortable, and then I'll go back to the chat for more questions in there.
Okay, thank you all. And this has been great, a great catch up, and I feel like so many of the things you're talking about are so well thought out. So I thank you all for all that work. I have a couple of comments and suggestions. The first one, I guess it has to do with the parks. I noticed that most of what funding can be used for in the parks is all kind of building out things or increasing programming. And that's all fine, but I've been doing, since I've been back in town, some volunteer work in the parks and just walking around the city. And we really need to bulk up the arborist office and the people that take care of the parks. And I know that some of this money can't be used, or we have to consider, if we're going to be hiring people, that it's going to require income way past this money. But I would just like to sort of do a shout out that if we're going to continue to consider ourselves a tree community and a wildlife habitat community, we really need the staff to work on being able to continue to keep the parks free of invasive plants, and it just is really getting ahead of us. So that's one thing. The next thing is about stormwater and some of the mitigation efforts. And I agree that a lot of this real engineering that's very expensive in certain parts of the town are what are going to help with these gigantic downpours that we have that are causing some of this bad flooding that people are experiencing. But I wonder if any of this money can be used to bulk up the program that already exists in the city between VPAS and the city for individual homeowners to get rid of some of their lawn and do like a conservation landscaping to keep water on their property. There is a tremendous amount of opportunity here for water just to never leave. And it's not just quantity of water, but by doing this conservation landscaping, you're also greatly improving the quality of the water because it's staying on a property and filtrating down and getting cleaned up on its way as it's absorbed. The problem with these projects, and I can speak of this personally because I have replaced a tremendous amount of lawn in front of my townhouse community this last year, the amount of money that the city and VPAS are offering right now is minuscule in relation to what these projects cost to do, because they require professional design and professional installation, which it should. But if any of this money can be used to bulk up and get more, maybe more information out to the community about the benefit of conservation landscaping and a bigger incentive to spend the money, I would love to see some of the money spent that way. That's all.
Well, thank you for those two excellent comments. And just to respond briefly, one on our urban forestry staff, we do have 3 vacancies that we're working very hard to fill. Charles Prince is our city arborist, and he and our HR department are working very hard to fill those vacancies. And we've really felt the loss of those positions very, very sharply. And I think you've expressed it as you walk through our parks. A lot of the wonderful work that our urban forestry crew does, which is the planting of the perennial gardens and taking care of those, pulling out invasive species. It makes such a wonderful difference in our parks, and we've lost that staff, and we're working right now to kind of essentially rebuild that urban forestry staff. So I'm looking forward to that, and it is kind of part of a bigger discussion we did have with the city council in recent meetings about the difficulty of it's a difficult hiring environment, and we've struggled to fill some of these positions. We're not unique in that, but we're also looking. Steve Mason's on this call, but he's working very energetically to consider all the ways that we can be creative and attractive as an employer to fill these vacancies in a really competitive market right now. And compensation is certainly a part of it, but the overall work experience and the ability to make a difference, those are really important things that we can offer in the city as well. With respect to stormwater, the credit policy is what I think you're referring to, and that is something that we have on our work plan to simplify it and make sure it's doing what it is intended to do, which is to incent homeowners to do good, positive water quality improvements on their property. And there is a limit to how far it can go. I mean, a lot of these projects at your home might cost thousands of dollars, and the average homeowner pays about $250 a year. So the power of that incentive is limited by that amount, but we have other restrictions on how those credits can be applied right now. The City Council is going to be taking up on Monday night an ordinance to create a Public Utilities Commission that would sort of step in and carry on the work of the ad hoc Stormwater Task Force, which completed its recommendations this summer. And with that policy, citizen policy group working with staff, among the items it will take up, I think, as a top priority would be that stormwater credit program. That was developed about 8 years ago with a citizen group, and I think we'll want to do a refresh on that.
Go ahead. It sounds like you have a follow-up. Go ahead.
So I actually wasn't talking about the stormwater credit program as much as the joint VPAS city program that compensates homeowners. I think it's up to $1,500 or half of whatever conservation landscaping project or a stormwater, a rain garden project would cost. And so what I'm saying is that that $1,500 doesn't come close to the thousands that it costs to put these projects in, because they require professional design and installation. And so I was suggesting that if I don't know how the split between VPAS and the city is made in terms of that money. But if any of this new money can be used to up that amount of reimbursement as an incentive for people to go ahead and, spend more money to do the conservation landscaping. That was my question and my suggestion.
Well, thank you for that clarification. And we'll look into that. The way it works right now, and this is a great VPAS initiative in partnership with the city, where part of the administration of these grants was kind of turned over to VPAS as possibly being a bit more user-friendly for homeowners to access the dollars that way. And so your comments are on point. We'll have to look at that program as well in terms of whether it's doing what we're hoping to do. You're absolutely right. These projects are expensive, and so we're trying to provide positive incentives, and are we getting where we need to be, I think is the question you're raising.
And that has brought to my mind one other question that I have. One of the resources that the city currently cannot take advantage of is any kind of consultation or help from Virginia Water and Soil or Soil and Water, because we don't have a memorandum of understanding with them. They only can work within Fairfax County or communities with whom they have a memorandum of understanding. The only thing we do with that organization is sometimes they will come and they will help. We can be part of building rain barrels. And I think that they may also have been the ones that did the composting bins when they were doing, make yourself. But I went to them to try to get some help before I did this conservation landscaping to see about ways to mitigate some really serious water runoff that I was having. And they said, oh no, we can't come to you because you live in the city of Falls Church. Why don't we have a memorandum of understanding with that organization? I know the city of Fairfax does. And as far as I know, it doesn't cost us anything to have that relationship. I would love to have an answer to that question if somebody can look into that.
Well, I was not aware of that myself, so thank you for raising that, and we will follow up on that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We did have a question in the chat about providing comment about ARPA funding and getting it in front of council. So I think Celeste Heath might be on here, but I think I can say just generally any comment for public council. You can speak at their regular meetings, which are the first and third Mondays of the month, and you can do that virtually or in person now. And there is a sign up form if you want to sign up in advance, or you can just go to the meeting, get a speaker slip. Celeste is typing, so hopefully I'm getting this all correct. That information is on our website, fallschurchva.gov/public comment. And then if you have a comment about ARPA that you want to send to us, perhaps you might have more questions after thinking about this presentation. Oh, there we go. And Celeste is saying also written comments can be sent directly to cityclerk@fallschurchva.gov, and that all of those comments get sent to every council member. So if you have questions about ARPA funding after you've thought about this presentation a little bit, you can email us at publicinfo@fallschurchva.gov, and we'll get answers to you about that. So I think I presented that correctly. Certainly, Wyatt, if you have anything else to add, please do.
Thank you, Susan. That's right. And the easiest way is to send it in by email, and then that gets circulated to all of council members. And then also easy is to come to meetings and speak during public comment period. And that's a great way to communicate directly as well.
I'm not seeing additional comments or hands raised at this time. Maybe we'll give it a second to see if anyone has another question. Raise your hand, add it to the chat. Okay, we might be ready to go.
Okay, well, again, this meeting has been taped and it will be posted on the city's website so people can review it. So help us spread the word just to let people be aware of this opportunity for investment that the city has. And I know the city council wants your views and wants your input on it. And so thank you for participating today. Again, what we're looking for is to present a plan on November 15th. And then the council will consider an appropriation for the remainder of this fiscal year, which is essentially, by the time that's done, it'll be about 6 months appropriation for the remainder of this fiscal year, and the adoption of a plan for the remaining 4 years. And that then will be subject to appropriation each year. So as needs change or as priorities change, the council could revisit that plan and make different decisions down the road. But we think it's very helpful for the community to know what that plan is, and that's why the council wants to adopt that plan for sort of a 4-year structure for the full use, so we can plan accordingly and have some predictability into it. So thank you for participating, and look forward to further engagement on these topics as we move forward. And everybody have a great rest of the afternoon. Be well and stay safe.